I sat by my apartment window, the late morning sunlight falling across the polished oak floor, the hum of the city rising faintly from below. My phone buzzed again, and I saw the message. Thanks for existing. Don't come again. My fingers froze over the mug of coffee I hadn't yet touched. My dad. After everything. Every bill I'd quietly covered, every repair, every surprise grocery run, every medical copay. I had been the invisible thread holding a crumbling family together. And this was his gratitude. I let out a soft, ironic laugh. The silk of my blouse felt too delicate for the harshness of the words, the caffeine bitter on my tongue. I could see the faint reflection of my own eyes in the glass, calm, composed, successful. No one would ever guess what this text dug up, the ache of feeling unwanted, the sting of trying to be enough for people who would never see me. Part of me wanted to reply, to demand some shred of decency. Another part wanted to throw the phone across the room and erase every memory of being Samantha Hayes, the one who always pays. Instead, I let it sit. A seed of quiet resolve took root. I had spent years making myself small for them. Maybe it was time they saw the version of me who refused to be invisible. I glanced at the soft leather of my chair, the polished desk, and the certificates framed on the wall. My success, earned quietly, privately, without applause. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled at the thought that the world might finally meet the real me. I remember the day it all started. At least, the day I realized I couldn't exist for them anymore. I was 22, fresh out of college, full of hope, and completely naive about how much a family could take without giving back. My dad had just lost his job again. My mom was exhausted from her part-time work, and somehow, I was the one footing the rent, the car insurance, and the medical bills for my younger brother, Jake. I had walked into the kitchen, stack of receipts in hand, my hands trembling slightly. Dad, I paid the electricity and the water this month. And I covered the groceries, too. He didn't even look up from his chair, his eyes flicking over me like I was a shadow. Thanks for existing, he said without warmth. Don't come again. The words hit me like a slap. I could feel the lump rising in my throat, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped the envelopes. My mom bit her lip, trying not to react, but I could see the pity in her eyes, the silent admission that she wouldn't stand up for me. I ran to my bedroom and slammed the door. The cheap carpet scratched my knees as I sank onto the floor. I clutched a small silver locket my grandmother had given me when I graduated high school. Remember, Sam, she'd said, the world will try to make you small, but you were born to shine. Never forget yourself for anyone else. I held that locket like it was a lifeline, my one reminder that I could choose a different path. I thought about leaving then, really leaving, but I didn't have the courage yet. I stayed in the apartment, in the chaos, quietly counting my bank account, calculating my escape in whispers. Every time my dad dismissed me, every sarcastic comment, every message like the one I just got today, I felt a little more like I was disappearing. By the end of that week, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to vanish entirely, but I was done existing for them. Not in the cruel sense, but in the sense of sacrificing myself endlessly. I promised myself that I would build a life where I mattered first, a life that no one could belittle or dismiss. And in that quiet, trembling resolve, I felt the first spark of independence, a tiny flame that would one day grow into a fire strong enough to illuminate everything they thought they knew about me. After that week, I started carving out a life that belonged to me, a life my family couldn't touch, criticize, or belittle. I rented a small studio downtown, tiny enough that I could manage the rent without help but big enough to feel like freedom. My grandmother's locket hung around my neck every day, a quiet reminder that I had permission to shine. The first few months were brutal. I worked long hours at a marketing firm, often staying past midnight, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating tired eyes and a heart full of hope. I doubted myself constantly. Could I really succeed on my own? Could I rise above the habits, the sneers, and the dismissals that had followed me my whole life? Then I met Mrs. Linda Marshall, a seasoned executive who had built her own boutique advertising company from scratch. She saw something in me, Maybe the same spark my grandmother had always noticed. "You've got the vision, Sam," she said one evening over takeout boxes and the hum of fluorescent lights. "You just need someone to remind you that your ideas are worth fighting for." Under her guidance, I started my own side projects. Late nights turned into early mornings filled with sketching campaigns, negotiating deals, and learning the ins and outs of business ownership. Every rejection stung. Every mistake felt like a confirmation that I didn't belong, but slowly, the wins began to pile up. First, it was a small local client, just a boutique coffee shop, but their success was my validation. Then a regional campaign, then a big national brand that finally put my name on the map. I started keeping meticulous financial records, saving every penny, investing strategically, quietly building an empire my family had no idea existed. I learned to keep my achievements private. Social media showed only glimpses: a casually snapped photo of a conference, a modest lunch at a trendy cafe. No hints of my growing bank account, my sleek apartment, or my expanding client roster. It was my secret rebellion, a silent proof that I didn't need their approval to thrive. I began to notice subtle changes in myself. The insecurity that once weighed me down started to fade, replaced by a calm confidence. I could walk into a room and feel like I belonged, not because anyone told me I did, but because I had earned it. I could speak without apology, negotiate without fear, and dream without restraint. Yet, despite my growing success, a quiet corner of my heart remembered that sting: my father's cruel words, the dismissals, the thankless efforts. I carried it with me, not as a burden, but as a driving force. Every dollar, every achievement, every late night was a testament that Samantha Hayes was not invisible, not small, and not anyone's afterthought. And somewhere deep inside, I knew one day they would see. They wouldn't expect this version of me, the woman who had survived their disregard and emerged stronger, sharper, and untouchable. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. I hadn't expected them. My dad, my mom, and even Jake had called, saying they wanted to catch up and that I should come home for lunch. My fingers itched to ignore the message, but something inside me said, "Show them who you've become." I arrived at my childhood home with a quiet confidence that surprised even me. The smell of old carpet and reheated lasagna hit me first, the same smells I'd once associated with discomfort and dismissal. But this time I didn't flinch. I didn't shrink. I walked through the door like I owned my presence, because in every way that mattered, I did. They were sitting in the living room, my dad in his worn recliner, scrolling on his phone, my mom fussing with a pile of old magazines, and Jake lounging with headphones on. Their eyes lifted as I entered, registering surprise. "Sam, you look different," my mom murmured, her voice caught between awe and confusion. I smiled politely, setting my purse down and letting it settle naturally. "Thanks. I thought I'd drop by." The room felt smaller than I remembered, almost fragile, like it might collapse under the weight of what was about to happen. I led them into the dining area, then subtly gestured to the stack of files and folders I had casually placed on the table: contracts, invoices, campaign reports. "My marketing company just landed a national client last month," I said smoothly. "And I've been steadily growing since I left college. Everything is entirely self-funded and self-owned." Their jaws dropped. My dad's eyes widened, then narrowed, searching my face for a hint of exaggeration. There was none. The numbers on those spreadsheets weren't fiction. They were proof. "And this," I continued, motioning to a photo frame on my phone of my downtown office, sleek, modern, and decorated with art I had chosen myself, "is my office. My team, my clients, my decisions. I manage everything." A heavy silence settled over the room. I could feel my father's disbelief, a flicker of shame, and perhaps the faintest trace of awe. My mom's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the table, and Jake just stared, his headphones dangling uselessly around his neck. "Wait, you paid for all this yourself?" my dad finally asked, his voice tight. "Yes," I replied, calmly, almost tenderly. "Everything. And I didn't do it to impress anyone. I did it because I finally realized I didn't need permission to exist. I exist for myself first." I watched as the reality sank in. The man who had texted me, "Thanks for existing, don't come again," now had to confront a woman he couldn't dismiss, couldn't belittle, couldn't ignore. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and the room vibrated with the weight of the truth. For a moment, I let them absorb it, the house, the numbers, the calm authority I carried. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply let my presence speak, and it spoke louder than any words ever could. And in that silence, I realized something. They weren't the same people who had hurt me, and I wasn't the same girl who had once trembled in the kitchen, silently paying for their mistakes. We were all facing a new reality now, one where I was no longer invisible. The air in the room was thick, and I could feel the weight of their expectations, that they would find the same meek, compliant Samantha they had always known. Instead, they found someone who had learned the hard way how to demand respect and set boundaries. I sat down across from them, letting my hands rest calmly on my lap. "I want to make something clear," I began, my voice steady but warm. "I care about you. I always have. But I will not let old patterns continue. If you want to be a part of my life now, there are rules, conditions, really, that must be met." My dad swallowed hard, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. My mom's eyes glistened, and Jake looked bewildered, like he had no idea this version of his sister even existed. "The first thing," I said, "is accountability. Dad, that text, the dismissive words, the lack of gratitude, that's not acceptable anymore. If we are to have a relationship, you will speak with respect, and I will not be your emotional or financial punching bag." I looked at my mom next. "You, too. No more enabling dismissive behavior. We are a family, but it has to be healthy. Support doesn't mean sacrificing yourself or letting someone walk all over you." Then I turned to Jake. "And you, little brother, if you want to be part of my life, you need to take responsibility for yourself. Get a job, contribute, and stop expecting handouts. We can have a relationship built on equality, not dependency." I paused, letting my words sink in. Their reactions were subtle but telling. My dad's jaw tightened, my mom's shoulders slumped as she processed the boundaries, and Jake's eyes widened, realizing he couldn't rely on old patterns anymore. "These conditions aren't punishments," I added. "They're the groundwork for respect and real growth. I want us to have meaningful relationships, but they can't be built on guilt, entitlement, or dismissal. You get to choose whether you follow them. I get to choose how much I allow into my life." The room was silent for a long moment. I could almost feel the shift, the subtle trembling of the old dynamic fading, replaced by something new. Power wasn't about money or revenge. It was about control over myself and my choices. I wasn't giving ultimatums to hurt. I was offering a chance for connection on fair, healthy terms. I smiled gently, letting my calm confidence settle over them. "I love you," I said, "but I love myself first. And I've spent too long existing for others without being seen. That ends now." I could see it in their eyes. The realization that the girl they once ignored had become someone untouchable, someone who would no longer compromise her worth. The tables had turned, and the balance of respect, power, and love had finally been restored, on my terms. Months passed after that confrontation, and slowly, things began to shift. My dad started showing up in small ways, asking for advice, helping Jake with school projects, and even apologizing for the careless words he had sent that day. My mom joined a community group she had always wanted to try, her energy lighter, her smile more genuine. Even Jake took a part-time job, proud of the independence he had earned and the respect he finally had for our shared efforts. I watched all of it quietly, sometimes from a distance, sometimes in casual visits to the old house. I felt pride, yes, but also relief. The relationships weren't perfect, they never would be, but there was space now for honesty, for respect, and for love that didn't come at the cost of my own well-being. One evening, I held my grandmother's silver locket in my hands, the same one I had clutched on that first tearful night years ago. The inscription inside caught the light. "Never forget yourself for anyone else." I traced the delicate letters and smiled. I hadn't forgotten. I had remembered, I had fought, and I had grown. Sitting in my apartment, Overlooking the city that had become my playground and sanctuary, I reflected on the journey. The pain, the sleepless nights, the self-doubt, all of it had been necessary. Every struggle had forged the person I was now, someone who existed not to appease others, but to thrive on her own terms. I realized that stopping myself from existing for them had been the best gift I could ever give to myself. It allowed me to rise, to claim the life I deserved, to create a space where my worth was undeniable. And as I set the locket on my desk and watched the evening sun paint the skyline gold, I whispered quietly, almost to myself, but meant for anyone who had ever doubted their own value. I stopped existing for those who couldn't see me, and in doing so, I finally began to live. It was simple, it was quiet, and yet, it carried all the strength, independence, and grace that defined the woman I had become.